Elara pressed her thumb into the crease of the wolf's lower lip, working a splinter of bone from between teeth the size of her index finger, and she did not know that the creature whose jaw she cradled had signed 3 execution orders that morning. He lay on the floor of her workroom, this enormous black wolf with silver threading through his ruff, like veins of quartz in dark granite. His ribs rose and fell against her knee. The smell of him filled her tiny house, something wooled and layered, pine resin and frozen soil, and underneath it all, the sharp mineral scent of a body running too hot. She mistook the heat for fever. She had been wrong about that from the beginning. The splinter came free with a wet click. Elara held it up to the lamp, a fragment of elk bone, wedged sideways. "There," she said softly, wiping blood from his gum with a strip of boiled linen. "That is why you were not eating. You poor, stupid, beautiful thing." Kael, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, sovereign of 6 packs and commander of 4,000 wolves, closed his eyes and leaned his massive skull into the palm of a woman who made her living stitching torn ligaments in farm dogs and pulling porcupine quills from the faces of other people's livestock. A rural veterinary aide, the only one within 40 miles of the mountain villages, because the actual veterinarian had died of a stroke 2 winters ago, and the council had never bothered to replace him. She had no pack. Not anymore. The Ashwood Pack had stripped her membership when she was 16, not with any ceremony or cruelty, but with the quieter violence of simply forgetting to include her. Her name vanished from the census rolls. Her mother's old cabin was reassigned to a mated couple who needed the space. No one had shouted at her or called her worthless. They had just stopped seeing her there. The absence of malice was, in some ways, worse than hatred. Hatred at least required someone to hold you in their mind. She lived now in a converted tack room, behind a horse barn on the eastern edge of unclaimed territory. The walls smelled permanently of leather oil and sweet feed. Her bed was a narrow cot pushed against the wall, and her pillow was flat, lumped, filled with batting she had pulled from an old saddle pad because she could not afford a proper one. It was into this pillow that she had begun braiding his fur. She did not think of it as strange. He shed the way all wolves shed, and his fur clung to everything. Her wool blanket, the cracks between floorboards, the rough linen of her work apron. But the undercoat was extraordinary. Softer than anything she had ever touched. Softer than the belly of a newborn rabbit, and so dense that a pinch of it between her fingers felt like holding warm smoke. She had started tucking tufts of it into her flat pillow, almost without thinking. Then she had started braiding it deliberately, weaving it into the batting in neat rows, because the texture was finer than any wool she could buy, and because it smelled like him, like safety, like the only living thing that came back to her on purpose. She did not know that he counted. Kael could feel every strand missing from his coat, the way a human might notice a pooled thread in a favorite shirt. His wolf, the deep-brained animal intelligence that shared his skull, catalogued each absence with obsessive precision. 47 strands in the first week. Then 112. Then she began actively collecting it, running her fingers through his ruff while he pretended to sleep. And the number climbed past what his wolf bothered to count individually and became instead a warm, territorial satisfaction. She is keeping pieces of us. She is lining her den with us. She will smell like us even when we are not here. He had meant to stay one night. He had been running the eastern border in wolf form, something he did every new moon, because his wolf needed the silence and the cold and the miles of empty forest that no council chamber could provide. A rock slide had caught his left hind leg, not badly, but enough to slow him, and the bone splinter from a crushed elk carcass in the debris had lodged in his gum when he tried to chew himself free. He had limped into the nearest settlement, smelling of blood, and she had found him behind the horse barn at dawn, lying in the frost with his muzzle on his paws. "Oh no," she had whispered. Not screamed, not backed away. She had knelt in the frozen mud in her nightgown, a thin thing that did absolutely nothing against the cold, and pressed her bare hand to his flank to check his breathing. Her fingers were freezing. Her palm smelled of lavender and carbolic soap. His wolf had gone completely, humiliatingly still. Omega. The word had hit him like a wall of water. Not just any Omega. His Omega. The bond had slammed into his chest with a force that made his vision white out at the edges, and for 3 full seconds, Kael, who had held a rival alpha by the throat over a treaty negotiation without his pulse rising above 60, could not breathe. She had felt nothing. Omegas who had been separated from pack bonds too young sometimes had their recognition. Instinct blunted, like a muscle that had atrophied from disuse. She had looked at him and seen a big, injured wolf. She had dragged him inside by his scruff, all 180 pounds of him, talking the entire time about antiseptic and bone setting and whether she had enough elk jerky in the pantry. He had meant to leave the next morning, then the next, then the one after that. 3 weeks later, he was still there, sleeping on her floor with his tail curled over his nose, eating elk jerky from her hand, and quietly losing his mind. "I should not be here," he told himself each night as she settled onto her cot and let one arm dangle over the side so her fingers rested in his fur. Her breathing would slow. Her hand would go slack, and his wolf would press upward into her palm so gently that she would not wake. "I am the Alpha King. I have responsibilities. I have a council meeting on the fiscal restructuring of the northern grain stores. I have 7 border disputes pending arbitration. I cannot be lying on the floor of a veterinary aid's converted tack room, having my ears scratched." His wolf offered no rebuttal. His wolf was too busy memorizing the exact pressure of her fingertips behind his left ear. The dual life had started as an accident and become a catastrophe. By day, Kael returned to his keep, a half-hour's run through the mountains in wolf form, and resumed being the Alpha King. Cold, precise, controlled. He sat in his council chamber, with its walls of dark stone and its long oak table scarred by the claws of 6 generations of Alpha Kings before him, and he made decisions about territory and trade and the movement of troops along the southern border. His beta, Ronan, a wiry, sharp-eyed man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, watched him with increasing suspicion. "You smell different," Ronan said on the 4th day, leaning against the doorframe of Kael's private study. "I do not. You smell like lavender and carbolic soap and something else, something Omega." Kael did not look up from the report. He was not reading. "I was running the eastern perimeter. I passed through a settlement. There are Omegas in settlements, Ronan. That is where they live. For 4 days. The perimeter is long." Ronan said nothing. The silence had the specific quality of a man who knew he was being lied to and was deciding how much he enjoyed his current rank. "Will that be all?" Kael asked. "Your fur is thinner on the left side of your ruff," Ronan said, and walked out. Kael waited until the door closed before dropping his forehead to the desk. By night, he ran, through the dark pines, down the frozen creek beds, across the open meadow where the moon turned the frost to ground glass under his paws, and then the barn, and then the tack room door, which she now left propped open with a river stone because she believed the wolf came and went as he pleased. She had named him. Sable, she called him, because of his coat. He found this both absurd and secretly devastating. The first week, she had simply let him sleep on the floor and fed him leftover stew. The second week, she had started grooming him, working through his coat with a wide-toothed comb she normally used on draft horses. And he had endured this with the rigid dignity of a man receiving a spa treatment he had not asked for and would never admit to enjoying. The third week, she had given him a bath. He should have refused. He should have simply stood up and walked out of the galvanized steel tub she used for the farm dogs. But she had filled it with warm water, genuinely warm water, heated in kettles on the wood stove, which must have taken her half an hour, and she had added something to it, some herb mixture that smelled of chamomile and calendula, and she had rolled up her sleeves to the elbow and gotten in there with her bare hands and worked the soap into his coat from ears to tail. She had washed his face, cupped his jaw in both hands and wiped the soap from around his eyes with a wet cloth, carefully, the way you would wash a child's face, and she had said, "Close your eyes, Sable. I will not get soap in them. I promise." He had closed his eyes. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories had closed his eyes and let an Omega who did not know his name wash his face in a horse tub, and something behind his sternum had cracked open like ice on a spring river. That night, she had toweled him dry in front of the wood stove. The heat made the room smell of warm cedar and wet wool, and the lavender she hung in bundles from the ceiling beams. She had spread an old quilt on the floor for him to lie on, and as he settled, she had sat beside him with her back against the stove, running her fingers through his still damp fur, and pulling out the loose undercoat in soft tufts. "You are going to make me the nicest pillow in the territory," she said, tucking a handful of fur into the pillowcase beside her. "Do you know that? You have better fur than any animal I have ever touched. Do not tell the horses I said that." She had laughed, and the sound had settled somewhere low in his chest and stayed there. The escalation was not planned. It happened the way all disasters happen, one small concession at a time. First, the sleeping arrangements changed. She had woken one night from a bad dream, thrashing, and had rolled off the narrow cot onto the floor. He had been beside her instantly, pressing his body against her side, and she had curled into him still half asleep, burying her face in the ruff of his neck. Her breath came in short, hitching sobs. She smelled of adrenaline and salt and the sour note of old fear. He did not move. He lay rigid with restraint, every muscle locked, his wolf howling with the need to shift and hold her with arms instead of this insufficient body, and she had fallen back asleep with her fist clenched in the fur of his chest. After that, she stopped sleeping on the cot. She made a nest on the floor instead, the quilt and 2 extra blankets and the pillow, now thick with braided fur. And he slept beside her every night with her spine pressed against his ribs and his tail draped over her hip. He told himself this was fine, normal. Wolves provided warmth. It was a biological function. He told himself this while she murmured in her sleep and burrowed closer, and his wolf purred like a furnace. Second, the gifts. His wolf had started bringing her things. Not grand things, not jewels or gold, because his wolf was smarter than that, and understood instinctively that a woman who could not afford a proper pillow would be frightened by expensive gifts from a wild animal. Instead, there were practical offerings. A rabbit, freshly killed, left on the doorstep each morning. A bundle of dried sage he had pulled from a wild bush, dropped at her feet with absurd casualness. A thick wool sock he had stolen from a clothesline 3 miles away, because her feet were always cold, and she only owned 2 pairs, and one had a hole in the toe. The sock had been a miscalculation. "Sable," she had said, holding it up with a bewildered expression. "This is a man's sock. Where did you get a man's sock?" He had yawned elaborately and looked at the wall. "Did you steal this from someone's laundry?" He put his head on his paws and closed his eyes, projecting an innocence he did not feel. She had put the sock on. It was too big, the heel reaching halfway up her calf, and she had laughed and wiggled her toes inside it and said, "Well, it is warm. Thank you, you ridiculous thief." His wolf had been insufferable for the rest of the night. Third, and this was the one that nearly destroyed him, the conversations. Elara talked to him. Not the way most people talked to animals, the cheerful babble, the rhetorical questions. She talked to him the way she would talk to a person she trusted completely, and the difference was that she did not trust any person completely. He was a wolf. Safe. A locked box with no key. She could pour anything into him, and it would stay. "I think I was not meant to have a pack," she said one evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him, while she stitched a torn horse blanket. The needle glinted in the lamplight. Her fingers were rough and scarred from years of working with animals, and she pushed the needle through the thick canvas with the practiced ease of someone who had been mending things her whole life, because no one else would. "I was not thrown out. That is what people assume when they hear I have no pack, that I must have done something. But the truth is worse than that, I think. The truth is that nothing happened. I was just not important enough to notice when I slipped away." She paused, pulling the thread tight. "My mother died when I was 14. After that, it was like the last thread holding me to the Ashwood pack just dissolved. No one was cruel about it. My aunt would see me at the market sometimes and say, 'Oh, Elara, I keep meaning to have you over for dinner,' and then she never would. My cousins stopped including me in the solstice run. Not on purpose. They just forgot. And after 2 years of being forgotten, I stopped reminding them." She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of dark honey in the lamplight, and they were dry. She was not crying. She was stating facts, the way you might describe the weather, and somehow that was worse. "You are the only one who comes back," she said. "Every night you come back." His wolf made a sound, a low, involuntary whine that vibrated through his chest and into the floorboards, and she reached out and laid her hand flat against his sternum, and felt it. "I know," she said softly. "I know." She did not know. She did not know anything. She did not know that the sound his wolf made was the mate bond screaming, or that the vibration under her palm was his human heart beating so hard it hurt, or that the alpha king of the Northern Territories was lying on her floor with tears running from his wolf eyes into his fur, because an omega who had never been important enough to notice had just put her hand on his chest and said, "I know to something she could not possibly understand." He should have told her then. He did not. And then Lord Calum arrived. Calum was the younger brother of the Southern Alpha, a man of 28 with an easy smile and copper-bright hair, and the kind of careless charm that came from never having been denied anything in his life. He had been sent north on a diplomatic errand, something about timber rights, and he had stopped in the eastern settlements to water his horse and stretch his legs, and he had found Elara. She was in the paddock behind the barn, stitching a gash on a mare's foreleg. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair was tied back with a strip of leather, and there was blood on her hands. She was talking to the mare in a low, steady voice, the same voice she used on him, and the horse stood perfectly still for her, even without a twitch rope. "That is impressive," Calum said from the fence rail. She looked up. Her face did the thing that faces do when a handsome stranger pays a compliment. A brief, surprised openness. Not attraction, exactly. More like the reflexive response of someone who is not used to being noticed. "She is a good mare," Elara said. "She trusts me. I can see why." Calum said, and smiled. Kyle watched this exchange from the tree line in wolf form. His lip curled back from his teeth. His wolf's vision narrowed to a red-edged tunnel focused on the exact point where Calum's hand rested on the fence rail, 3 feet from Elara's shoulder. "He is just being polite," Kyle told his wolf. His wolf disagreed. His wolf wanted to cross the paddock and stand between them and let the Southern Lord count his teeth. "I am not going to do that. He is a diplomat. I cannot maul a diplomat," his wolf suggested, with the wordless eloquence of pure instinct, that mauling was not off the table until the diplomat stopped smiling. Calum came back the next day. And the next. He brought Elara a packet of suturing needles from the southern markets, the curved kind, with the swagged-on thread that she could never afford. And she had held them up to the light with an expression of such genuine delight that Kyle had to leave. He shifted back to human form in the forest, dressed in the clothes he kept cached in a hollow oak, and walked into the settlement as the Alpha King. This was the first time she saw him as a man. He had planned it carefully. He would arrive, conduct a routine inspection of the Eastern Territories, and casually make it clear that the settlement, and everyone in it, fell under his direct protection. He would be commanding, authoritative. He would emanate the controlled, unassailable power that made lesser alphas lower their eyes and diplomats reconsider their positions. She came out of the barn covered in horse blood, saw him standing in the yard with 2 of his guards flanking him, and said, "Oh, are you here about the drainage ditch? Because I have been asking the council about that for 8 months, and the runoff is getting into the well water." His guards looked at him. He looked at her. She had a smear of blood across her forehead, where she had pushed her hair back, and she smelled like lavender and carbolic soap and mare's blood. And underneath it all, the warm, devastating scent of Omega that hit him exactly the same way in human form as it did in wolf form, which was to say, it hit him like a fist wrapped in velvet. "The drainage ditch," he repeated. "It is a genuine public health concern. I have seen 3 cases of waterborne illness in the livestock this season alone, and it is only a matter of time before it affects the drinking water. I have documentation." She had documentation. Kyle, Alpha King, looked at this small, blood-covered woman with her documentation about a drainage ditch, and he felt his control slip for the first time in his adult life. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of losing control. The quiet kind. The kind where the mask you have worn so long, it feels like your actual face suddenly does not fit anymore. "Show me," he said. She showed him. She walked him along the drainage route, pointing out erosion patterns and contamination points with the brisk competence of someone who had been solving problems alone for so long that it did not occur to her to be impressed by the person she was talking to. She did not bow. She did not use his title. She called him Sir once, at the beginning, and then forgot about it and just called him you for the rest of the tour. His guards were appalled. Kyle was enchanted. He fixed the drainage ditch. He sent engineers the next day. She sent him a note of thanks via courier that said, "The well water no longer tastes of horse manure. Appreciated." Calum, who had witnessed the entire exchange, watched the Alpha King leave the settlement with an expression of thoughtful calculation that Kyle did not like. That night, Kyle returned to her tack room as the wolf. She was sitting on her nest of blankets, the new suturing needles Calum had given her arranged on a cloth beside her, examining them one by one. She looked up when he pushed through the door, and her whole face changed. "Sable." She held out her arms. He went to her, lowered himself to the floor beside her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his ruff. "I met the Alpha King today," she said into his fur. "He is not what I expected." His ear twitched. "Everyone says he is terrifying, cold, that he never smiles. But he listened to me talk about drainage for 20 minutes. About drainage, Sable. No one has ever listened to me talk about drainage. My own pack could not be bothered to remember my name, and the Alpha King stood in the mud and looked at my water samples." She pulled back and looked at his face. Her eyes were bright. "He is strange, though. He kept staring at me like he was trying to solve a mathematical problem, and he smelled incredible. Is that an odd thing to say about a king? He smelled like the forest after rain. Like you, actually, but different. Warmer." Kael held extremely, perfectly, agonizingly still. "Also," she added, reaching for the suturing needles, "Lord Calum gave me these today. He is very kind. He said he would bring me a proper surgical kit next time he comes north." Something in Kael's chest clenched like a fist. His wolf made a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a whine, but existed in the exact unbearable territory between the two. "Jealous?" Elara said, amused. She scratched behind his ear. "You do not have to worry. No one is replacing you. You are my favorite." She did not see his eyes close. She did not see the way his claws dug into the floorboards, leaving 4 thin gouges in the wood that she would later notice and wonder about. He was going to have to do something about Lord Calum. 2 days later, the Southern Lord arrived at Elara's barn to find the Alpha King already there, in human form, leaning against the paddock fence with the studied casualness of a man who had been pacing for 20 minutes and had only just managed to stop. Kael had fabricated a reason, something about inspecting the new drainage work, which required approximately 90 seconds of actual inspection and had taken him, so far, 2 hours. "Your Majesty," Calum said, with a bow that was perfectly correct and perfectly friendly and perfectly infuriating. "I did not expect to see you in the settlements again so soon." "I am thorough," Kael said. "Evidently." Elara came out of the barn carrying a bucket of water and a foal with a splintered leg tucked under her other arm like a football. The foal was struggling. She was not. She set the foal down in the paddock with practiced ease, poured the water into the trough, and looked at both men. "Lord Calum, Your Majesty." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Is this about the drainage ditch again? Because the engineers already started the new diversion channel, and I must say they are doing excellent work." "I brought you the surgical kit," Calum said, producing a leather case from his saddlebag. "The one I mentioned." Elara's eyes widened. She took the case, opened it, and Kael watched her fingers move over the instruments inside, the hemostats and scalpels and retractors, with the reverent precision of a musician being handed a Stradivarius. Her lips parted. Her breath caught. "These are Whitfield instruments," she said. "These are made in the capital. These cost more than I make in a year." "Consider it a gift," Calum said, "for someone who does so much with so little." Kael's jaw tightened, not because the gift was inappropriate, because it was perfect. It was exactly the right gift, the one she actually needed, and Calum had known that because Calum had paid attention, and the fact that someone else had paid attention to what Elara needed made Kael's wolf want to tear something apart. He did not tear anything apart. He stood perfectly still and said, "A generous gift, Lord Calum." "I believe in supporting local infrastructure," Calum said smoothly. "I will have my council arrange a formal supply grant for the settlement's veterinary services," Kael said. "Instruments, medications, a proper facility. Something sustainable." Elara looked at him. Calum looked at him. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. That, Elara said slowly, would change everything. Then it will be done. He was showing off. He knew he was showing off. His wolf knew he was showing off. Ronan, who was standing behind him pretending to inspect the fence post, absolutely knew he was showing off. But Elara was looking at him with an expression that was not awe, not gratitude, but something more complicated, a careful, assessing look, as if she were re-examining something she had misunderstood. "Thank you," she said. Sir, not your majesty." He was losing ground to a woman who could not remember his title. That night, in her tack room, the wolf lay on the quilt while Elara sat with the surgical kit open on her lap, touching each instrument again and again, memorizing the weight of them. "The Alpha King is going to fund a proper clinic," she told him, "a real one, with supplies and equipment and maybe even an assistant." She shook her head. "He and Lord Calum are having some kind of territorial contest, and I appear to be the territory, which would be flattering if it were not so exhausting." She paused. Her hand moved to his ruff, found the spot behind his left ear, where his wolf could not help but lean into her fingers. "The truth is, Sable, neither of them knows me. They know the version of me that is useful to whatever they want. The king sees a problem to solve. Lord Calum sees a cause to champion." She was quiet for a moment. "You are the only one who just lies here. You do not want anything from me. You just want to be here." Wrong, his wolf thought. Want everything. Want all of it. Want the pillow and the blankets and the smell and the sound, and the way she breathes when she is falling asleep. And every single morning, from now until the last one. He pressed his nose against her knee. "I had a dream last night," she said, and her voice dropped to the register she used when she was about to say something she had never said aloud. "About the Alpha King. It was not about drainage." Kale's wolf went rigid. He was in this room. Not as the king, just as a man. Sitting where you are. And I was braiding his hair, which is absurd because I have never been close enough to touch his hair. But in the dream, it felt natural. Like something I had always done. She laughed softly, embarrassed. "And then he turned into you." The silence in the room was absolute. "He turned into you, Sable. And I was not surprised. Like I had always known. Isn't that the strangest thing?" His heart was hammering so hard, he was certain she could feel it through the floorboards. His wolf was screaming. She knows. She almost knows. Tell her. Shift. Show her. Now. Right now, while her hand is in your fur and her voice is soft, and the room smells like both of you together. He did not move. He could not move. Because if he shifted now, in this warm room, with the lamp burning low and her hand in his ruff, it would not be a revelation. It would be a violation. She had trusted the wolf because the wolf was safe, and the wolf was safe because the wolf was not a man who could want things from her. And the moment she learned that every confidence she had whispered into his fur had been heard and understood and hoarded by a man with a crown and an agenda, the safety would shatter. He had to find the right moment. The right moment found him first, and it was nothing like what he had planned. 3 weeks after the drainage ditch, Elara disappeared. Kael arrived at her tack room at dusk and found it empty. The quilt was folded. The lamp was cold. The pillow, thick with braided fur, sat at the head of the empty nest, and beside it lay a note in handwriting he did not recognize. He could not read the note in wolf form. He shifted behind the barn, the transformation ripping through him with the speed of adrenaline, bones reforming, fur receding, and he stood naked and human in the cold air for 3 seconds before snatching the note from the floor. Miss Elara has been summoned to appear before the Ashwood Pack Council regarding the unlawful occupation of pack-adjacent territory. She is to present herself at the Ashwood compound by sunset for formal hearing. Compliance is expected. The paper crumpled in his fist. She had not occupied unlawful territory. She had been living in a converted tack room that no one had wanted for 7 years. But pack law was a labyrinth of technicalities, and the Ashwood Council was chaired by a woman named Hestia, the aunt who had always meant to invite Elara to dinner and never had. And Hestia's eldest son had recently mated the daughter of a southern landowner who wanted the eastern settlement's grazing rights, and Elara's little barn and her little clinic and the Alpha King's supply grant were suddenly inconvenient. He dressed in the cached clothes. He did not bring guards. He did not send word to the keep. He ran. The Ashwood compound was a cluster of timber buildings around a central hall, the kind of pack architecture that valued solidity over elegance. Kyle arrived at the gates smelling of pine and sweat and fury, and the 2 wolves standing guard took one look at his eyes, which had gone the pale amber of a full shift barely contained, and stepped aside without a word. He heard her voice before he saw her. "I am not contesting ownership," Elara was saying, her voice steady but thin at the edges, the way a rope sounds just before it snaps. "I am asking for 60 days to relocate. That is all. I have animals under my care. I cannot simply leave them." "The council's ruling is effective immediately," Hestia said. Kyle could hear her through the door. Her voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a woman who had elevated avoidance to an art form. "We have been more than patient, Elara. You have been living on pack-adjacent land for 7 years without formal permission, because no one told me I needed it, because no one told me anything, because no one was paying attention." A silence, then Hestia, quieter. "I know I was not. I know we should have." "What?" "I should have checked on you after your mother died. I knew that. I thought about it. Thinking about it is not the same thing." "No, it is not." Something in Hestia's voice caught. A hairline fracture in the smooth stone. Not enough to forgive, not nearly enough, but enough to suggest that the woman behind the voice had spent 7 years not looking at Elara. Not because she did not care, but because looking would have meant seeing what she had allowed to happen. And Hestia was the kind of person for whom shame and inaction were the same animal. She had meant to call. She had meant to visit. She had meant and meant and meant, and meaning had become a wall she could not climb over. And eventually she had stopped trying and called it kindness. It was not kindness, but it was human. "Regardless," Hestia said, and her voice was smooth again, the fracture sealed. "The ruling stands. You must vacate the premises by dawn." The door slammed open. Later, Elara would tell the story differently. She would say the Alpha King walked in, that he entered the room. But the truth was more primal than that. The truth was that the door broke. It did not open. It broke, the hinges tearing from the frame, and the man who came through it was barely a man at all. He was Kyle, and he was the wolf, and he was something between the two, his eyes fully amber, his canines extended past his lower lip, the veins in his forearms standing out like cables as his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The Ashwood Council went silent. 8 wolves, most of them middle-aged, most of them comfortable, all of them suddenly confronted with the very specific and immediate reality of what an Alpha King's anger looked like when it was not filtered through diplomacy. "Kyle," Elara breathed. "Not your majesty. Not sir." The name she should not have known. The name she had heard in dreams where a wolf turned into a man, and she was not surprised. He looked at her. The amber in his eyes flickered, And then, because his wolf had been waiting for this moment for 7 weeks and had no interest in political strategy or proper timing, he shifted. It was not the controlled transformation he usually performed, the measured, dignified transition from human to wolf that he demonstrated at formal ceremonies. This was something raw. His body reshaped itself in 3 seconds flat, clothes shredding, bones cracking and reforming with sounds like green wood breaking. And then the wolf was there, the enormous black wolf with the silver-threaded ruff, and he crossed the room in 2 strides and stood in front of Elara with his teeth bared at the council and his tail pressed against her leg. The room smelled of pine resin and frozen soil, and the sharp mineral scent of a body running too hot. The same scent. The exact same scent she had been braiding into her pillow for 7 weeks. Elara stared at the wolf. The wolf stared at the council. The council stared at the Alpha King in his fur, standing in their meeting hall like a guard dog with a crown. "Sable," Elara whispered. The wolf turned his head, looked at her with those amber eyes, and pressed his nose against her palm, the way he did every night when she reached for him in the dark. The sound she made was not a word. It was something smaller and more broken, a sharp intake of breath that hitched at the top and did not come back down. She staggered back 1 step. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, went wide and then wider, and for 3 full seconds she did not breathe. "You," she said. "You. The drainage. The sock. The bath. You were right there when I told you about the dream. I said he turned into you, and you just lay there, The wolf shifted back. The transformation was slower this time, almost gentle, as if his body understood that gentleness was required, even if his wolf did not. Kael stood before her in the ruins of his clothes, barefoot on the stone floor. And he was not the Alpha King. He was a man who had been lying on her floor for 7 weeks, eating elk jerky from her hand and pressing his nose into her palm. And every mask he had ever worn was on the ground beside the shredded fabric. "The sock," he said, because he had to start somewhere, and the beginning was too enormous to hold. "I stole it from a clothesline 3 miles away because your feet were cold. The rabbit every morning was me. The sage was me. The counting, Elara. I counted every strand of fur you took. I felt every one. You let me bathe you. Yes, I washed your face. Yes, I told you things, private things. I told you I dreamed about. Yes, the silence was enormous." She was shaking, not with fear, with the specific tremor of a person whose entire understanding of the last 2 months has been picked up and turned sideways, and every tender moment she thought she had shared with an animal was suddenly a conversation with a man who had heard everything. "You lied to me," she said, and her voice was flat. Not angry yet. Anger would come later. This was the stage before anger, the hollow place where trust used to be. "I did, every night, for 7 weeks. Yes. Why?" He could have said mate bond. He could have said instinct. He could have said, because my wolf recognized you before I understood what that meant. All of these things were true, and none of them were enough. "Because you were the first person who touched me without wanting something," he said. "Because you washed my face and told me to close my eyes and promised you would not get soap in them, and you kept the promise. Because I have been the Alpha King since I was 19 years old, and in 19 years, no one has ever kept a small promise to me. They keep the large ones. The treaties, the oaths, the declarations of fealty. But the small ones, the I will call you back, the I will save you a seat, the I will not get soap in your eyes, Those are the ones that disappear. And you kept them all." She was crying now. The tears fell straight down her cheeks without any sound, and her arms were wrapped around herself as if she were trying to hold something together that had already come apart. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. I trusted you. I know. You do not get to decide for someone else what they can handle knowing. You do not get to lie to a person for their own good and call it protection. That is what the Ashwood pack did. They decided I was not important enough to tell the truth to, and you decided I was too fragile to hear it. The outcome is the same. I am standing here not knowing what was real." The words hit him harder than any physical blow he had ever taken, and he had taken many. Because she was right. Because the lie he had told himself, that he was protecting her, that the timing was not right, that he needed to find the perfect moment, was the same lie Hestia had told herself for 7 years. "I meant to. I was going to. I was waiting. Everything was real," he said. "Every night was real. The fur you braided into your pillow came from me because I wanted to be there even when I was not. And every strand you took felt like being chosen. Not by a wolf, by you. Every conversation you had with the wolf was a conversation with me, and I heard you, Elara. I heard you say that no one comes back, and I came back, and the fact that I came back as the wrong version of myself does not change the fact that I came back." The council had not moved. 8 wolves, frozen in their seats, watching the Alpha King stand barefoot and half-dressed in their meeting hall, confessing to 7 weeks of elaborate deception with the emotional composure of a man whose composure was a memory. Elara uncrossed her arms. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, roughly, impatiently, the way she wiped blood from horse wounds. She looked at him. "The sock," she said. "What?" "It was too big. The heel came up to my calf." "I know." I could not exactly check the sizing. Something moved in her face. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the ghost of it. The faintest tremor at the corner of her mouth that might, in better lighting, have been the beginning of a smile. "You are an idiot," she said. "I am the Alpha King. Those are not mutually exclusive." Ronan, who had arrived at the compound 45 seconds after Kael had broken down the door and was standing in the wreckage of the entryway, made a sound that he would later deny was laughter. Kael looked at the Ashwood Council, at Hestia, who was sitting very still with her hands folded on the table and her face the color of old ash. "This woman is my mate," he said. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. "She is under my protection and my claim. Her territory, her clinic, and every animal in her care are sovereign holdings of the Northern Crown. Any attempt to displace her, dispossess her, or deny her access to pack resources will be treated as a direct challenge to my authority." He paused. "Is the Council's ruling still effective immediately?" Hestia opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Elara, and for one brief moment, something passed between them that was not enmity and not forgiveness, but the exhausted recognition of 2 people who had failed each other in different ways. Hestia because she had not looked, Elara because she had stopped asking to be seen. "The ruling is withdrawn," Hestia said quietly. Kael turned back to Elara. She was standing with her arms at her sides now, her chin up, her eyes still wet. She smelled like lavender and carbolic soap and the salt of tears, and underneath it all, the warm, devastating scent of Omega, his Omega, and the bond between them was a living thing, a hum in his blood that resonated at the exact frequency of her breathing. "I am still angry," she said. "I know. I am going to be angry for a while. I know that too. But you are going to walk me home. in human form, with your actual face, and you are going to sleep on the floor, and I am going to sleep in my nest, and you are not going to touch me until I say you can. Yes, and tomorrow you are going to tell me everything, every single thing, starting with how many strands. 417, he said, as of last night. She stared at him. You actually counted. Every one. She turned and walked out of the council hall. He followed, barefoot, through the gates and down the dark road, and Ronan fell in behind them at a distance, close enough to guard and far enough to pretend he was not witnessing the Alpha King being led home by a veterinary aide in an oversized stolen sock. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. They were better than that. They were real. She was angry. She was angry for 11 days, during which Kael slept on the floor of her tack room in human form, on the bare wood, without the quilt, because the quilt was hers and she had not offered it. He brought his own blanket. She told him it was too thin. He said it was fine. She threw the quilt at his head the next morning and said, "If you get sick, I will have to treat you, and I am tired of treating idiots." It was not forgiveness. It was a quilt. But it was a start. He told her everything. The border run, the rock slide, the bone splinter. The moment the bond had hit him. The internal arguments with his wolf, which she found less endearing than he had hoped. The sock, the sage, the rabbits. 417 strands, she repeated on the third day. 431 now, he said. You braided 14 more before you knew. I am keeping the pillow. I would not dream of taking it. She made him fix the drainage system properly. Not just a diversion channel, but a full municipal water treatment plan. And she made him attend the planning meetings, all 7 of them, during which she argued with his engineers about filtration rates, while he sat in a folding chair and watched her with an expression that Ronan, stationed by the door, described to the rest of the guard as physically painful to witness. Lord Calum returned once. He arrived at the settlement with the surgical kit upgrade he had promised, and found the Alpha King sitting on the paddock fence while Alara stitched a goat. "Ah," Calum said. "Lord Calum," Kael said pleasantly. "Your Majesty." Calum looked at Alara, looked at Kael, performed the rapid mental calculation of a man who recognizes a claimed territory. "I see the drainage project is coming along well." "It is," Alara said, not looking up from the goat. "Are those the upgraded hemostats?" "They are. Excellent. Leave them on the barrel, please, and thank you." Calum left the hemostats. He looked at Kael one more time, and something flickered across his face that was not defeat exactly, but the rueful acknowledgement of a game that had ended before he understood it was being played. "She is remarkable," Calum said quietly, so only Kael could hear. "She is," Kael said. And because his wolf had learned something from Alara about small, kept promises, he added, "The timber rights. I will have my council prioritize the southern request. You will have fair terms." Calum blinked. Then he smiled, a real one this time, not the diplomatic version, and the surprise in it made him briefly, unexpectedly, human. "Thank you, Your Majesty." He rode south and did not return. On the 14th day, Alara stood up from her workbench, crossed the room to where Kael was sitting on the floor, reading a stack of council reports she had forced him to bring home so she could understand what exactly the Alpha King actually did all day, and she put her hand on his head. He went still. She ran her fingers through his hair. It was dark, almost black, with threads of silver at the temples that matched the silver in his wolf's ruff. She had known it would feel like this. She had dreamed it. "You came back," she said, "every night. As yourself, as the wolf, it does not matter. You came back." He looked up at her. "I will always come back." "I know," she said, and this time she did. The ceremony was held at the Alpha King's keep, in the great hall with its dark stone walls and its awkward oak table, and every pack in the northern territories sent representatives. Elara wore a dress she had not chosen, and shoes she could not walk in, and an expression of barely concealed terror that Kael found so disarming. He forgot the first 3 lines of the formal declaration. Ronan cleared his throat from behind him. "This woman," Kael said, and his voice filled the hall the way his wolf's howl filled the forest, with a resonance that vibrated in the chest of every wolf present, "is my mate. She is your Luna. She has given me more than I deserve and asked for less than she is owed. And any wolf in this territory who fails to treat her with the respect she is due will answer to me personally and immediately, and with a degree of enthusiasm I cannot overstate." The hall was silent. 4,000 wolves watching. Elara leaned toward him. "That was very aggressive for a love declaration," she whispered. "I am an Alpha King. We do not do subtle." "Clearly." He looked at the assembled wolves. She stood beside him, small and straight-backed and smelling of lavender, and the mark he had left on the curve of her neck 3 nights ago, the claiming bite, was visible above the collar of her dress. She had not tried to hide it. She had put her hand over it that morning, feeling the raised edges of the scar, and said, "It feels like it has always been there." "She is mine," he said, quieter now. "Not for the hall, for her. And I am hers. And that is all." In the back of the hall, Hestia stood with the Ashwood delegation. She did not approach. She did not try to claim connection or credit or the belated warmth of family. But she was there, and when Elara's eyes found her across the room, Hestia inclined her head, one small nod, and the expression on her face was not pride and not regret, but the complicated, unfinished thing that lives between the two. Elara nodded back. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something, and sometimes something is where forgiveness starts. That night, in the Alpha King's chambers, which were larger and warmer than the tack room, but somehow felt less like home, Elara built a nest on the floor. She dragged the heavy furs from the bed, layered them with blankets she had brought from the barn, and placed the pillow at the head. The pillow stuffed with 431 strands of wolf fur, braided into the batting in neat, even rows. Kael shifted. The black wolf settled onto the furs beside her, and she curled against his ribs the way she had every night for 7 weeks, her spine against his warmth, her fingers in his ruff. He draped his tail over her hip. "You are shedding on the royal furs," she murmured. He pressed his nose against the back of her neck, right over the claiming mark, and breathed in. Lavender. Carbolic soap. The warm, devastating scent of home. She was already asleep when her fingers tightened in his fur and pulled 3 more strands loose. He felt each one. 434.